Against the backdrop of absolutely failed negotiations on Ukraine, the Kremlin boasted today that they have already prepared a multi-billion-dollar deal with Donald Trump, which will include not just trade but actually bribing the American president. Do you remember how? A few days ago, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, stated that there are separate negotiations between Moscow and Washington, where an economic cooperation plan worth $12 trillion is being discussed, proposed to the Americans by Vladimir Putin's advisor Kirill Dmitriev. Do you remember that? So, today Bloomberg is publishing the contents of the so-called Dmitriev package, which consists of 7 points. This is a list of economic initiatives with which the Kremlin is trying to attract America to its side and push it to put pressure on Ukraine. For a deal on Russian terms, this document lists areas of possible cooperation between the United States and Russia. But Bloomberg believes that the main incentive for Donald Trump is the 5th point. This is Russia's proposal to return to the dollar-based settlement system, which should strengthen the dollar as the world's reserve currency and at the same time weaken China's position. Thus, Putin is ready to do absolutely anything, even betray his ally China, just so Trump would force Ukraine to sign a peace agreement that benefits only the Kremlin. Meanwhile, Russia has effectively withdrawn from negotiations with Ukraine because it has once again downgraded the status of its negotiating team representatives. At the negotiations on February 17 and 18 in Geneva, the Russian delegation will once again be led by the Russian pseudo-historian Medinsky. So there's definitely something to discuss here. My name is Alexei Pichi, and let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like this episode, and leave any comment you want. Also subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, today Bloomberg revealed that very package from Kirill Dmitriev, meaning the economic and trade cooperation plan between the Russian Federation and the United States of America worth $12 trillion. As stated, the Kremlin made a proposal for a broad economic partnership with the Donald Trump administration, including Russia's return to the dollar settlement system. Let me remind you, Putin claimed the dollar was dying and should be abandoned, urging a complete switch to settlements in wooden rubles. The proposal details 7 points where the economic interests of Russia and the United States may align, including joint investments in natural gas, oil, and key rare earth metals. And, as the publication writes, this plan would represent a departure from Kremlin policy and could bring the Donald Trump administration a major victory in weakening relations between Moscow and Beijing. Now let's discuss all of this in more detail. Let me remind you, exactly a week ago, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, for the first time stated that there is a possibility of the United States and Russia signing documents on economic cooperation worth about $12 trillion. And back then, Ukrainian intelligence called this document the Dmitriev package, meaning the aid to Vladimir Putin, who is negotiating with Trump's advisor Stephen Witkoff. And now I'll quote Zelensky. The amount is about $12 trillion. This is a package of economic cooperation between America and Russia. So we are hearing about the possibility of such or similar bilateral documents between the United States and Russia. These documents may include issues related to Ukraine. We are clearly showing that Ukraine will not support even possible such agreements between the parties about us without us. The Ukrainian delegation conveyed the president's position that if there are any bilateral agreements between Russia and the United States, then the points that are related to Ukraine. And they cannot contradict the constitution of Ukraine, the laws of Ukraine, and they should not be discussed without Ukraine. But since then, there has been no information about what exactly is in Dmitriev's package. And now Bloomberg is revealing the details for the first time. According to an internal Russian document seen by Bloomberg, the Kremlin has made proposals that could lead to Russia accepting the dollar again as part of a broad economic partnership with the Trump administration. The document details 7 points where the economic interests of Russia and the United States may align, but only after an agreement is reached. The document talks about cooperation between the two countries in promoting fossil fuels at the expense of more environmentally friendly alternatives, as well as joint investments in natural gas, offshore oil, and essential raw materials. This will bring additional profits to American companies. And now I'll quote Bloomberg. The proposal, circulated among high-ranking Russian officials, provides previously unpublished information. about the Kremlin's thinking and tactics at a time when potential economic agreements between the United States and Russia are being discussed as a key point of any future peace deal on Ukraine. At the core of the proposal is Russia's return to the dollar-based settlement system, which would mean a stunning reversal of Kremlin policy and potentially dramatic changes in the global financial system. And it's worth adding here that the United States has already proposed gradually lifting society for worldwide interbank financial telecommunication sanctions on Russia as part of any peace agreement. This is a necessary first step for resuming operations in dollars. And just recently, United States Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said directly that after a peace agreement, oil sanctions will be lifted. But what is being considered in this Kremlin document goes much further. Until now, the search for alternatives to the dollar rather than restoring ties with the United States-led system has been Russia's key goal, as Vladimir Putin has sought to deepen his relations with China. For this reason, Western government officials familiar with the contents of this document have said they consider it highly unlikely that Putin will ultimately make a deal that goes against Beijing's interests. Although he may sign it, he might not fulfill it in the future. And here is the question. Long before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Putin was working on reducing Russia's dependence on the American currency as part of the efforts of competing economic powers to challenge the financial hegemony of the United States. The justification for these efforts became even more obvious when the United States and its allies, using their control over dollar transactions, imposed sanctions against a significant part of the Russian economy after the start of the full-scale war. Since then, Moscow has been trying to develop trade in alternative currencies and systems, especially with China and countries like India. For example, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa even wanted to introduce their own currency, but all these efforts have not led to much success. Thus, on the one hand, returning to dollar settlements would mean once again submitting to Washington's financial dominance and nullifying efforts to reduce reliance on the currency. Sanctions against the Russian economy in the context of a full-scale war would be a victory for Donald Trump's administration in achieving its obvious goal of weakening relations between Moscow and Beijing. And then Trump would be ready to do absolutely anything just to achieve this goal, including putting pressure on Ukraine. Moreover, Putin's team quickly figured out what else to pressure in order for Trump to agree further. Quote from Bloomberg. Other details of the plan are also meant to match Trump's ambitions in other areas. Sanctions against the significant Russian economy, full-scale war. They stated that some proposals were specifically designed to deepen divisions between the United States and Ukraine's European allies. But some of the proposals in this document are distant promises with potentially large sums that could encourage Donald Trump to make a deal but may never be implemented. But we shouldn't forget that the Kremlin is unlikely to want to move away from cooperation with China, since Beijing has become the most important supplier of components. And if the Russian economy faces full-scale sanctions, full-scale sanctions. However, the document claims that returning to the dollar system would allow Russia to expand its currency market and reduce payment balance volatility. For the United States, such a step would further strengthen the dollar's position as the world's reserve currency and could reduce the global trade imbalance by leveling energy prices between China and the United States. Sanctions against the significant Russian economy, full-scale war. The Kremlin confirmed that yes, they are indeed conducting such economic negotiations with Washington. Today, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov made the following statement, quote, "A group on economic issues is working on our side. It is headed by my colleague. Sanctions on the significant Russian economy." Full-scale prominent things are outlined in this information. Bloomberg. Of course, we are offering cooperation, and of course, in this cooperation, there is potential interest in sanctions on the significant Russian economy and a full-scale war. Click the bell and don't forget to like. If you found this episode interesting and useful, you can support our channel by donating or subscribing using the links and details in the description of this video. I would appreciate any support from you. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone. Subtitles.